A mother, a baby, an empty desert, and almost no water. That is one of the most powerful scenes in all sacred history, and it is why the story of Hajar still moves millions of Muslims today. Before we go further, one point needs to be clear for accuracy. Hajar is not technically a Sahabi. A Sahabi is someone who lived with the Prophet Muhammad, and Hajar lived long before him. But her greatness does not depend on that title. Her story stands on its own. In Islamic tradition, Hajar is one of the most honored women in sacred memory because her trial in the barren valley that later became Makkah turned trust in Allah into living action. This is not only a story about pain. It is a story about tawakkul, trust in Allah, joined with effort at the hardest possible moment. The Quran gives part of the frame. It speaks of Ibrahim leaving part of his family in an uncultivated valley near the sacred house. It records his prayer that hearts should incline toward them and that they should be provided with fruits. The Quran also tells Muslims that Safa and Marwa are among the symbols of Allah. The full emotional story of Hajar running between those hills comes mainly through hadith and early Islamic tradition. And that detail matters because Islam did not leave this event as a distant memory. It turned it into a living ritual. At the center of the story is one question. When Ibrahim leaves, Hajar asks whether this was commanded by Allah. That is the turning point. Once she understands that this was Allah's command, she says words that contain the whole heart of the test. Then he will not abandon us. That sentence is not passive. It is not empty optimism. It is certainty in Allah at the exact moment when visible security disappears. Think about the scene. There is no city, no market, no tribe, no shaded well, and no human plan that looks large enough to solve the problem. There is a mother, an infant, and a desert. That is why the story reaches so deeply into Muslim hearts. The test is stripped down to its purest form. When material support disappears, what remains of trust? But Islam does not present trust as sitting still. When the small amount of water runs out, Hajar does not wait in frozen despair. She moves. She climbs Safa and looks. She comes down and crosses the valley. She climbs Marwa and looks again. She repeats this 7 times. Every part of that movement matters. It shows that tawakkul does not cancel action. You rely on Allah while using every lawful means available. That is why sa'i in Hajj and Umrah is so powerful. Pilgrims do not merely talk about Hajar's fear. They physically reenact her run between Safa and Marwa. What began as one mother's desperate search in an empty valley became a permanent act of worship for millions across centuries. Few sacred stories are carried by the body as directly as this one. You walk where she ran. You remember that she did not give up after one look. She searched again, and again, and again. The miracle of Zamzam comes after this effort. Islamic narrations differ slightly on the exact scene. Some emphasize that the angel Jibril struck the earth. Others mention the movement of infant Ismail's heel at the place where water appeared. The central truth is the same. Water came by Allah's mercy from a place where no visible source existed. That is why Zamzam is not remembered as ordinary water. It is tied forever to desperation, effort, relief, and divine care. Hajar then tries to gather and contain the water. In Muslim memory, this detail feels very human. The miracle arrives, and she still acts with urgency, trying to hold the blessing in place. The well of Zamzam becomes one of the most sacred signs in Islam. Prophetic traditions later praise it as blessed and connected to intention. Pilgrims have carried it home for generations, praying over it and associating it with healing, nourishment, and barakah. But the well is never separated from the mother beside it. Its origin is not abstract theology. It is mercy arriving at the limit of human desperation. The story does not end with water. Water changes everything. Once Zamzam appears, settlement becomes possible in that barren valley. Later, the Jurhum tribe comes to dwell there with Hajar's permission. The place that looked empty begins to hold life. In this way, Hajar's trial becomes part of the beginning of sacred history in Makkah as a lived community. Without her endurance, the emotional road to the later raising of the Kaaba by Ibrahim and Ismail would not feel the same. That is one reason her story carries such weight. She is not a background figure. She is central. And that centrality teaches something beautiful about motherhood in Islam. One of the permanent rituals of Hajj preserves not the stride of a king, not the march of an empire, and not the charge of an army. It preserves the run of a mother searching for water for her child. That alone should make people stop and reflect. Islam placed her effort inside worship for the entire Ummah. Her story also teaches a deeper meaning of sabr, patience. Sabr does not mean the absence of pain. Hajar felt urgency, fear, and need. Sabr does not mean passivity either. She ran until there was nothing more a human being could honestly do. Sabr means staying faithful to Allah, while pain is real and action is still required. That lesson speaks to almost every hardship people face now. Not everyone stands in a physical desert, but many stand in financial fear, illness, infertility, grief, loneliness, migration, or uncertainty about the future. Hajar shows a path through that emptiness. Trust Allah. Move with dignity. Keep using the means Allah gave you. Do not mistake waiting for worship when action is still possible. Another beautiful lesson sits in the sequence itself. Allah could have caused Zamzam to appear before Hajar ran. Yet the tradition emphasizes effort before relief. This pattern shapes Islamic ethics in a profound way. Tawakkul is not laziness covered with religious words. It is reliance that purifies action. You act because Allah commanded action. You trust because the result belongs to Allah, not to your strength. For a historically grounded documentary, it is useful to note that the biblical Hajar tradition overlaps with this story in some ways, but the Islamic memory of Hajar is rooted in a distinct sacred geography. Makkah, Zamzam, Safa, Marwa, Ibrahim, and Ismail form a specifically Islamic map of devotion. And Hajj gives this memory a communal and embodied form unlike almost anything else. That is why her story never fades. Muslims still walk her path. They still drink from the well tied to her fear and relief. They still remember the sentence that changed the whole scene. If this is from Allah, then He will not abandon us. In the emptiest landscape, Hajar gave one of the fullest demonstrations of Iman. She had no army, no city, no worldly protection, and no visible solution. She had a child, a desert, and certainty in Allah. That is why her trial in the valley became an everlasting sign. If you want the next story where daily habits quietly shape health, wealth, or even an entire life, watch the next video now.